The floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. And I am really honored to be here. And I love talking to people who are beginning and in the middle of trying to define their career. It's one of the things I love the most about my job, actually. And I'm going to be talking a lot about myself today. So I'm not going to plunge into an introduction because you'll hear about it very soon. And also even sharing some personal stories, because I think it's important for us to remember that we're all humans and that we have lives outside of our careers. And you are all preparing to do a very demanding kind of career. And it's really easy to get caught up in the career part of your job. And so this is a really important thing for us all to think about, is how our lives actually impact our careers and vice versa. So I entitled this Career in Academic Medicine, Lessons Learned Along a Crooked Path, because it seems, if you heard my story without any of the embellishment that I'm going to do today, you'd think that, oh, this is just very simple. You go to school and you wind up at Harvard. And it's not that simple, actually. So let me make sure. Okay. So let me first tell you what I do right now. And so I have a lot of different parts to my job. It's what makes my job so much fun, actually, is that I don't do the same thing every day. And so my clinical work is very important. As you heard in the introduction, I am a pediatric neuropsychologist. So a lot of my clinical work has to do with diagnosing and treating, but mostly diagnosing and assessing kids with learning and attention issues, things like ADHD, dyslexia, autism spectrum, developmental disorders. I also am a researcher in those same topics, and I feel like the importance of clinical work and research really support each other. And without the clinical work, I wouldn't know what to research, and the research informs what I do in my clinical practice. And then I also do a lot of writing. It's something that I'm passionate about, something that I love doing. I also love teaching. As you know, I'm here, and this is, again, one of my favorite parts of my job. Oops. And there should be one other thing there. Okay. And one of the things that has sort of surprised me in my career, something that I never planned on doing, and I'm positive that some of you here listening will be doing things 20 years from now, you think, I never thought I would be doing this, and that is doing a lot of outreach to the public. So I do a lot of public speaking. I do a lot of media things. I do a lot of TV work, podcasts, being guests on different sorts of events. And so it's something I never expected to do, but it's something I feel like is really important. And, you know, when you think about what we've all lived through in the last few years, 2 years, in times of COVID, part of the problems that we have in terms of vaccinations and keeping people safe have to do with how health professionals have communicated with the public. So outreach is really an important part of our jobs. We have to inform the public as to what things they need to be concerned about and how to educate them best. So anyway, that's a part of my job I never really expected to do, but it's something that I really love doing. So my path started with, of course, my interests. And I'm going to talk to you in a couple of minutes about why I got interested in this particular field of childhood disorders, but I'll save that for a minute or two. But let me just start by saying my interests when I started college were in abnormal and normal development. I was very interested in how kids grew, how they learned. I was interested in just the field of psychology. I went to school quite a long time ago, 30 years ago, and psychology wasn't what it is now. It was still developing in ways that we never expected. So it was an exciting time to be learning psychology, but I didn't major in psychology. And there are a few reasons for that. One is that it was kind of a new-ish field in a lot of ways. And I thought it was much safer to major in special education. So I majored in special education. I taught special education for a few years before I went back to graduate school. I feel like those sorts of opportunities that many people have on their way to graduate school or medical school can be some of the most important experiences that they've had. And that was clearly the case for me, that it was something that I was really, I learned so much about kids and families and systems. It was really an important time in my own development as my career. And then I went back to school. I went to graduate school in clinical psychology. And then when it was time to apply for internships, and in psychology, internships are something that you apply for in America, at least, and you get matched very much like it is in medical school in the US. And so I was very lucky. I applied for an internship at Harvard Medical School. I was very lucky to get it, and then stayed for my postdoctoral fellowship, and then wound up building a career there. Again, not something that I necessarily expected to do. So I was starting to think about, so what are the things that really helped me build a successful career? And so I came up with these 10 things, and I first thought of these things and then went to the literature to see, are these things really a thing? Like, is there data on each one of these items? So you can see the things that I'm going to be talking about is enthusiasm, optimism. I feel like that sort of has defined my way of relating to other professionals and even families. Finding a champion, another word for mentorship, finding a vision, an area of expertise. I also thought about, what are some of the other things that really help people move up the ladder of success, and I think exceeding expectations without making yourself crazy in the process. But then also things like flexibility, caring about other people, cooperating, and making your career more important than your job. And so I'm going to talk about each one of these things individually, how they related to me, but also how they are important and in any kind of leadership position, any sort of work environment. So I mentioned to you before that enthusiasm is something that is important to me, and it's just part of my personality. Not everyone is the same. Like, some people are more serious, but we can all be enthusiastic in terms of our passions. And real leaders aren't afraid to show some of that enthusiasm. And when you're energetic, when you're enthusiastic about something, it really is sort of contagious. And so the things that I'm still enthusiastic about are the things that I've listed here. Clinical care is one of those things that it's really easy to get burned out on clinical care. And you might, I don't know how it's been for all of you in the last couple of years, but it's been a really stressful time to be caring for other people. And so it's really easy to get burned out. But what I have found is that I still have that feeling of when I'm alone with the family or with a child, and I kind of close that door when you make that contact with a patient and you're there alone, that part is still very wonderful and very mysterious in some ways and very gratifying. It's all the other stuff that goes along with clinical care that can really contribute to burnout. But think about that as you're thinking, as you're feeling on some days like, oh, I can't see another patient, or I'm feeling overwhelmed. What part of that is it? Is it the patient? Oftentimes it's not. And it isn't for me. I find that I'm still enthusiastic about that connection, about that ability to make a difference in someone's life. Research is also something I'm enthusiastic about. And I mentioned before how I really feel like it's important to my clinical care to do research, or if I didn't have time to do research, to at least be immersed in what the research is saying for the kinds of patients that I'm treating. I'm also very enthusiastic about mentorship. And then what's really important and oftentimes not talked about is making time for oneself. And so taking time for my own interests, time for my outside interests like writing, sometimes that aligns with my work as a psychologist, and other times it's much more creative and it's just fun for me. So think about the sorts of things that are fun for you. Sometimes they can really align very well with your career, and other times they need to be completely separate, but they're all important parts of maintaining that enthusiasm. And so what's interesting is when you look at some of the research on enthusiasm, it really does prove to be the case that good leaders cultivate energy, inspiration, enthusiasm. A very recent study that I quoted here, and I can get you any of this data, it's at the bottom of my slides here, but a recent study that looked at leaders and people who were in the workforce during the early days of COVID showed that energy, enthusiasm, inspiration are highly valued in leaders, especially during times in crisis. And then also that passion for our work actually prevents burnout. So sometimes you might find yourself, and I'd love to hear your questions, or if you want to put anything in the chat as I'm talking, whether or not, you know, when you're feeling burnt out, it's hard to be passionate, but at the same time, finding that passion will help you not get burnt out. So, oh, this is a good question. With so limited time, how do we really find our passion or what we're really enthusiastic about? I think that's a great question. And one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that you need to try some things on before you're going to find that passion. And I have to say, I didn't really find it for quite a while. And so you need to pay attention to the sorts of things when you have a rotation or you're working with a certain population, you're like, I can't do this, cross that off the list and pay attention to when you're really feeling like, oh my gosh, I love coming to work, or I love these patients, or I feel like renewed or rejuvenated. Those are the sorts of things that you need to pay attention to, how you are reacting and feeling to the work, or feeling about the work that you're doing. So it's something that, you know, while you're doing the work, and I know you're all really busy and it's really hard to find time to do those things that you love, but monitor what you're doing. We spend a lot of time, I know for myself, on things like social media, looking at our phones. I mean, we can easily spend 2 or 3 hours a day doing that. And I know sometimes it's on the way, you know, on the bus or whatever, but pay attention to what you're spending time on and pay attention to how you're feeling. And don't be afraid to cross things off the list. It's not just about finding your passion, but also finding the things you're not passionate about. And some of the things that you think you might love, you might find that you don't, and that's okay. Like you are right now really looking at those options. And so don't put that kind of pressure on yourself, which we all do, but it's like, oh my gosh, I have to know exactly what I'm doing right now. It's just not the case. It takes a long time sometimes for us to figure out, like, what is it that I really want to focus on? I hope that answers the question a little bit, and I can talk about it more too as we go on. So along with that enthusiasm is optimism. And they're in some ways kind of the same thing, but I think of optimism as more forward thinking. So back to the question that was asked, how do we find our passion? Well, we find our passion by listening to our feelings, our, that inner voice that says like, oh, I really like this, or I really don't like this. But then also kind of looking towards the future, even if you're in a situation where you're like, I picked the wrong specialty and I have to make a switch. Being optimistic is about knowing that, okay, I have the ability to change something and I can, I'm not just, in a place where I can't make changes or figure out a different kind of environment. I know as a student, you don't have a lot of that, but trust the fact that you will, as you move on in your career, have more and more opportunities for choices. And so that also builds that kind of optimism. The other thing that I think is important to mention is that no one loves working with a negative kind of person. And I find that a lot of people who have leadership qualities naturally look at a situation and go like, yeah, well, I could do this better. And that actually might be the case. But as you're building your career, it's not a good way to start off with that kind of negativity or that negative way of presenting something. Trust the fact that if you're working hard and you have good ideas, as you bring up good ideas, you're going to be listened to. And if you're in an environment where you're not listened to, you need to get in an environment where you are in a better kind of place. Medical school, again, is not always the best place to be able to see your ideas be reached. But it's important, though, because optimistic people are more effective. They're also more ambitious. So when you think about it, if you think of optimism as being one of those things that's really forward thinking, well, if you're more of a forward thinking, hopeful kind of person, what you're going to find is that you're going to have more goals, because you're thinking, okay, I don't love what I'm doing now, but I'm going to change. I'm going to try this. Or I love what I'm doing now, and I'm going to do more of this. It's not something, though, that is just built. Or that's just bred. It's something that's built. So it's really important for you to think about the work environment that you're in. So if you're with people who are supporting you and you're being a supportive person to them, it really helps breed and develop optimism. So think about the sorts of people you're hanging out with. Try and surround yourself with more optimistic people. You'll find that you are in that same position of being more optimistic. And it's also career building, that it helps people feel confident in making career decisions, feeling a sense of control in their career, and developing more of a sense of career identity. I see I have one other question. Well, what about the risk of failure? That's a good question. And I think that many of us who are high achieving, which all of you are because of where you are right now, have somewhat of a fear of failure, because you've worked so hard to get where you are, and who wants to mess that up at the point where you are? So one of the things to, I kind of feel like in some ways, I don't know, I was going to say optimism is sort of the opposite of fear of failure. It's not quite right, but in part, you've got to sort of put those feelings aside a little bit. And you've probably heard about imposter syndrome, and some of you might feel like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm really doing what I'm doing. I feel sort of like an imposter. Here I am treating people, 3 times by 8, like people who are elderly or have serious illnesses who are looking to you for guidance. You're like, I barely know what I'm doing right now. That's okay. And in some ways, I don't have any evidence on this in this talk, but imposter syndrome is not always a bad thing. So you're trying on a role in some ways. We all feel like imposters at some times, and that fear of failure is kind of linked to that. So I feel like an imposter. What if I fail? And part of it is just kind of working through it and walking through it. The more experience you have, the less you're going to be worried about fear of failure. And if there are people around you that are sort of encouraging that fear of failure, again, I know you're in a situation right now where you kind of have to do the things you have to do to get where you want to go, but keep in mind that you don't want to surround yourself with people who make you feel that more than you normally would. Use that kind of fear of failure as a way of kind of fueling your, okay, I'm afraid. Like this is a big job that I'm doing. I'm literally, in between life and death here. And there's a lot to be fearful of. And I'm going to work through it. It does help the more experience you have. It definitely does. And to be honest, I find as a supervisor of people who are learning to be psychologists, that the ones who have a healthy fear of failure are sometimes the very best, make the very best psychologists. And I supervise a lot of psychiatry fellows too. I feel it's the same thing. What you're really saying is I'm vulnerable, and I am taking this so, I'm taking this job. It's so, strongly. So I'm in a way that's really important to me, that I treasure this. And so I'm afraid I could fail at this really important job, and that's okay. So don't beat yourself up about that, is what I would say. Okay. And these are great questions. Keep asking. And what I had said, and I didn't say this at the beginning of this talk to everybody, but I would love to, at the end, open it up and kind of hear questions and just sort of have a question and answer if that's okay. But for now, just put them in the chat. So I mentioned in answering these last couple of questions about don't surround yourself with people who make you feel like you're a failure or who increase your sense of, feeling like I can't do this job, or I don't feel competent, or I can't find a passion. Your mentor should make you feel passionate. Your mentor should really, you should have someone in your world who makes you feel like, okay, I want to be like this person, or I want to do what they do. I want to capture whatever that is that I really admire in them and make that my own. So find mentors, and a lot of mentors will be very busy, and don't take that as a sign that they don't want to be with you. Take it as a sign of you've got a mentor who's very busy, and you use the time that you have available with them. What are the things you should look for? Well, I wrote a few things down. The mentors that were really good to me were people who were very generous, who provided me with opportunities, and who were interested in me as a whole person. Now, that doesn't mean that we had to be best friends, but they were interested. I had children when I was in graduate school, and so they didn't pretend that I wasn't having a baby as I was in graduate school and pregnant. So it's those sorts of things that you want to look for. When I mean generosity, I mean really concrete things. And when you yourselves become mentors, think about how to concretely help someone. So I'm talking about things like authoring papers, or giving people an opportunity to write a book with me, for example, or giving someone an opportunity to do a lecture in my place because I couldn't do it. Those are the sorts of things that you want to look for in a mentor. And if you have the opportunity to say yes to those things, do it. If someone is giving you that kind of responsibility, it means they believe in you. And it's a very rare potential mentor who's just looking for somebody to do a lot of work. It doesn't mean that there aren't those people out there, because there are. So the research does back this up, that mentorship really is something that matters an awful lot. So one of the studies that I've quoted here is one that looked at medical residents who reported high support from mentors, scored much higher on all sorts of different assessments along the way, their own assessments, their clinical work, and so on. Mentorship matters not just for the person getting mentored, but also for the mentor. And so at some point, you will be in a position where you'll do a lot of mentoring, and probably even now you're doing teaching and mentoring of people who are a year or two behind you even. And so this is an important role for you in your own professional development. You'll learn a lot from looking at other people try to find their career path. So when we look at mentors and mentorees, we find that that dyad leads to higher job satisfaction, improved recognition by superiors, and increased technical skills. You become a better doctor. And that it matters a lot for inclusion and equity. I don't know how important that is here in the Czech Republic right now, but in the US and places like Canada, it's really important, and underrepresented groups can really benefit from mentorship programs. So it's important. And I just thought I would mention my experience as a mentor along my own path in life. This is, I don't know if you notice this, recognize this from intro psych class at some point, but it's Erickson's stages of development and how we develop along our lifespan, and the different sorts of things that we have to learn at different periods of life. And what's interesting is, as we enter young adulthood, intimacy versus isolation is the thing that we have to master. Can we be intimate with someone, with other people, not necessarily just a one, it's not just a, marriage sort of thing, but can we be intimate with other people, or do we become more isolated? And then as we go into middle adulthood, it's about generativity versus stagnation, meaning, are we generating things? Are we becoming stagnant in our job? And these are the two things I think, that cross over a career lifespan. And the beginning of your career, you're going to be thinking about, do I form those intimate relationships in my career? And it's really important that you do, I think, so that you don't become isolated in that career. I see that happen a lot with people. So be aware of that is something, this has never been applied to work life, but it really does matter in your work life as well. And then the same thing with, as you go along in your career, you want to be generating. You don't want to feel stagnant. You want to be seeing the next generation of people to come after you. It really helps with preventing burnout. It helps us look at new ways of what do we want to investigate. It helps break through career barriers for people who are underrepresented. So it's really an important sort of thing to be a mentor and to be mentored. So another thing that I had talked about in these 10 things that I came up with is about finding a vision. And someone had asked this. It wasn't something where I knew like, oh, I know exactly what I want to do right now. And I am, And I'm passionate about this, and this is what I'm going to do. I put a picture here. This is a picture of me with my brother, Robert, and as you can see, he has Down syndrome. And so when I think about why I became interested in psychology and learning differences, it really was because I had a brother who had learning differences at a time when people with learning differences weren't always thought of as deserving of every other opportunity that people without learning differences had. So it was really a wonderful time to develop ideas about what I'm passionate about, because it sort of developed along with him, because I was his older sister. So that's one reason why I went into teaching to begin with, even though I really wanted to major in psychology. I just thought teaching was a much more secure kind of path at that time. And then, like I said, I went to graduate school. But so sometimes a career path isn't linear. Like you might find that, you started out in one field and thinking you were going to go into neurology and find that you like psychology better, for example. So don't feel pressured that you have to find the one thing that you love doing forever. And so my clinical work, I mentioned before that there's this idea of a scientist practitioner in psychology, that we do clinical work, but our clinical work is informed by the research that underlies it. So part of my work has been in neuropsychological evaluations, but then also developing hypotheses about why some kids learn or react in different ways. So one of the first things I did when I started out as a licensed psychologist is I became very frustrated that there wasn't a book that talked to parents about the evaluation process. So when a child is referred to someone like me for a learning difference, we give them a big battery of tests and write these long reports, and parents have no idea what it all means. And so one of the first things I did was write a book, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was only a few years out of grad school, licensed psychologist, but I just sort of plunged in. And when I look back on that, I was like, why did I think I could do that? But don't ask yourself that question when you have things you want to do, just do it. And I did, and it was great. And writing a book was something I'd always wanted to do. So it was really wonderful that I had the opportunity to do that. And if that's something you want to do, there are always people around who have written books, or I know a lot of people that, that you're in contact with who have written things. So reach out to people if you've got interest in a certain area of research or in writing for general public, or what it's one of those things that you just want to make sure you make those connections and use the connections you have. So out of that, I really found that area of expertise. Like, what is it that I really want to do? And I started in grad school researching ADHD, in part because my grad school advisor was an ADHD researcher. So part of finding your own passion means sort of like taking the people that you have, the mentors you have around you, and then figuring out, okay, well, this is what he does, and this is what he's willing to work with me on. Now, how can I make this my own? So some of the things that I was really interested in at first was on emotional intensity and emotional reactions in people with ADHD. And then as I worked with kids, I found that a lot of kids with ADHD had a certain kind of neuropsychological profile. They had what we would call slower processing speed, meaning it took them a long time to do very simple sorts of tasks. So kind of clerical tasks very quickly. And those sorts of tasks are very important in the sorts of things that we ask kids to do all the time. It's also important in terms of understanding cognition and how speed relates to being able to retrieve words as you're needing to string sentences together, or retrieve basic math facts as you're doing math problems. So this is something that I just became really interested in because I just saw so many kids struggling with processing speed. And it was at a time in our lives over the last 15 to 20 years when the world really sped up. So I was noticing these kids, and as the years were going by, they seemed to be really impacted by the world we live in. And I talked about social media and all sorts of things. They just kids had to do a lot more. So these kids who had this kind of minor weakness in this one area of cognition were really struggling a lot. And it related in some ways to ADHD, but it wasn't exactly the same thing as ADHD. So this is one of those things where I kind of found this passion as, just as I went along, basically. And so one of the things I did, I think now 6 or 7 years ago, was write a book about these sorts of kids called Bright Kids Who Can't Keep Up. And they're do better in school, how this impacts their social relationships. And I wrote it with a postdoctoral fellow at the time. Like I said, those are the sorts of things that you want to be on the lookout for when you have mentors who are willing and able to share some of those things. And so it's something then, I wrote the book as I was starting to do some research in the field, which is really not how you're supposed to do things. You're supposed to do the research and then write the book, but there wasn't any research out there. And as you probably know, it takes an awful long time to write and publish papers. And so as we were looking at our own data, I was writing this book using everything I could find. And since then, I just have a few samples here of the sorts of papers that we've published about processing speed, how it's important, and it's related to depression, it's related to psychosis actually, and autism spectrum, and ADHD. So it's one of those things that has become very important in terms of understanding children and the development of the brain, white matter in particular. And so I just have here just an example of a paper that we published in 2019, 2020, and then an editorial by the European Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Journal about how this is something that's really in need of further scrutiny and something that really should be studied. So it was one of those things where I didn't set out to be a pioneer in this one little area of cognition. It's one of those things where let your interests kind of lead you to where you're really curious, and take it to the max that you can, and the ability that you can do with it at the time. But a lot of these things take a long time to find out, this is something that I'm really interested in, and then I really love it. So the next book, I told you that I wrote this book called Bright Kids Who Can't Keep Up, and it's about this. And what do you want to write next? Of course, I didn't really know. And the book that we've decided to write next, is tentatively called Bright Kids Who Have Lost Their Way. At first, it was called Bright Kids Who Don't Give a what, but we realized we probably couldn't put that on the front of a book. And so, but it really is those kids who just really just don't have any drive. They just don't care anymore. They're watching videos and YouTube on their phone all night long, playing video games in the basement of their parents' house. Those kids. When I started this, 2 years ago. It was before the pandemic, and now we've sort of pivoted this book to more capture pretty much all kids who have kind of lost their way in the last 2 years, who are kind of depressed and just really, not very excited about life. And so that's something that hopefully will be coming out soon if I ever finish it. I'm almost done. But the other thing too that I wanted to mention is that things happen in our lives that give opportunities for study. So here's a poster that my research team has done on emotional and is actually just accepted for publication. So it's one of those things where, okay, we're in a pandemic, we might as well make the best of it. So there's a lot of things that might happen in your life that will bear that out. So the other thing I mentioned too is that performance is important. And I don't want to say that performance is the only thing that's important, because we mentioned before that being a person who has a full range of things that they're passionate about is important too. But think about when you can not just do the minimum, but exceed expectations. It's not the sort of thing, and I tell this a lot to parents who have kids who they really want to push really hard. So I work with a lot of kids who have emotional issues, learning issues, but then I also work with kids who have anxiety. And a lot of those kids have parents who want to push them to do everything at the very top. And what I tell parents is it's important for everyone to do some things really well, but you don't have to do everything really well. And so that's a sort of thing that you want to think about when you're thinking about, okay, what are my passions? I want to exceed when I can, when I'm passionate about something. One of the most consistent things I hear from people who work with me, who were even before medical school or before graduate school, I hire a lot of research assistants, and they are primarily people right out of college, right out of undergraduate college, before they go on to medical school or psychology graduate school or the next sort of thing. So they're there for a year or two, maybe 3, working in my research lab. And a lot of times they think that their superiors don't notice them. So they don't think that, the department chair is above me knows who's doing well. But one of the things you want to keep in mind is that they do notice, even if you think that nobody is noticing how hard I'm working, somebody is noticing. And so that's important for you to know, because I find that sometimes people are just like, nobody seems to care, so I'm just going to put in the minimum because why bother? But know that there are people who are watching and do care. And so that's, you want to also notice and align with what are the performance standards, and you don't want to overdo it either. Like, I'm not a big proponent of like making your life your career. I'll talk about that in a second too. But the research does talk about performance and this idea of self-efficacy, the belief that you're capable. Your feelings of self-efficacy have implications for your later success. So even when you're looking at self-efficacy for higher salaries, more career satisfaction, even after controlling for things like discipline, GPA, gender, that the more you feel like, okay, I've got some efficacy here to do a good job, to change what I'm doing, I think that's really important. And that relates also to goal setting, that writing down your goals, reflecting on them is really an important part of achieving your goals. I mentioned that I'm writing this book about bright kids who don't really care anymore, or whatever we're going to call it. A lot of the to-do part of the book has to do with goal setting. And I did a lot of research on goal setting for this book. And it really talks about how important it is for us to identify what is it that we want to do. And to know that goals are not like written in stone. So just because we write down a goal and we find out like, I don't want to do that anymore, that's part of the goal setting process. So when we're talking about like finding your passion and that sort of thing, one of the important things you can do is to write down your goals, decide what it a way of kind of challenging yourself and thinking about how to change those goals as life needs to become more flexible. It's really important also for performance is something that's really important in terms of gender equality and underrepresented minorities in medicine. There are a couple of things that come into play here, and that is that there's research that shows that women in academic medicine tend to do more of the kind of unrecognized sorts of things, like helping others, things that oftentimes go unrecognized. And a program that was developed at Stanford that quantified that and found that they were a lot happier. So these are the sorts of things that if you're thinking, all right, I want to make a difference here, I think this where I'm working really could use some change. These are the sorts of things to think about, like, all right, how would we do this? How could we put into place new sorts of programs or research, or how could we try something out that might work to help other faculty members or other students? So the other thing to keep in mind is that minority faculty are oftentimes overburdened. So performance can work both ways. And so for underrepresented minority faculty, oftentimes they're asked to be like the spokesperson or the person who deals with all the diversity committees. And so you want to make sure that you are not that person, or you're getting credit for that, or not asking other people who represent a minority group to do more than it's really called for in that situation. So again, this works both ways. And I mentioned about COVID, and I was thinking about all of you right now and how your last 2 years of training have had to be so flexible. And I really think it will probably make you better professionals someday, but it's one of those things where you just hate to hear, anybody hates to hear that's like, oh, great, so I had to go through this hard time to be a better person. So I'm not saying it in that, and you're going to find that, you know, having to have handled and adapt to COVID has just made you a much more flexible thinker. And it's a terrible way to have to learn that lesson, but I bet your generation of physicians are going to be much better poised to roll with the punches, and dealing with patients all the time is, you know, you've got to be flexible a lot. So I mentioned before too, flexibility in my career, like I was asked to start a new program at Mass General and Harvard Medical School. It was something I didn't expect to do. And I was the clinical director until I came here to Prague, where I still am part-time. And so now I'm the executive director, and someone else that I've mentored is now the clinical director there. So seizing those opportunities when they feel right, and when they don't feel right, knowing that there will be other opportunities there too. And then I mentioned too, I sort of embraced the unexpected, this idea about being like a frequent guest on television and for news articles and reporters. And it opened up this new area for me that I never expected. So I thought I would just mention here, and I should say, how much time do I have? Is this an hour, or do we have more than an hour?
Roughly an hour, maybe like an extra 15 minutes for questions, but maybe like max an hour and a half.
Okay, all right, no problem. All right, I just thought I would share a very personal story, because I always like personal, because I'm a psychologist, so our whole life is just personal stories. So, but I'll tell you something that people ask, how did you wind up in Prague? And my short answer is that I was asked in, I think it was, I don't remember, 2014 maybe, to do some lectures on ADHD with a psychologist and a psychiatrist in Prague. And it was a friend of mine who was also an ADHD researcher. So they asked us to come. We spent a few days here. I love Prague. How can you not? And so my short answer was, oh, I collaborated with a couple of professionals here. And so when this opportunity opened up to do a visiting professorship, I came here. But that's the short answer. The long answer is actually, I had a very bad year. In 2016, I got divorced. And just a few weeks after that, my house burned down, like completely everything. And I had to sort of start from scratch. And one of the things I did was I came, I was still working and everything. It was a terrible, terrible year. And it was a terrible year for the world, actually. It was a bad year. So, so one of the things, I still worked, and I had a conference over here. And my two friends that I had met and sort of kept in touch with said, you know what? You've had a bad year. We need to put something together here for you, so you can come to Prague for a month or two and just like relax, do some research, and we'll have fun. And so it was supposed to be 4 weeks, and then they found money for 2 months, and then it was like 6 months, and then 7 months, and now I've sort of had this collaboration that I built. So I'm only saying this, that terrible things happen, and sometimes really good things happen after that. So that's my long story, which I don't often share with people, but it's really like interesting how sometimes things can lead to opportunities. So if you can remain flexible. And the thing is too, just as an aside, if I'd had a house and my, like pets and all that sort of stuff, that I couldn't have done this. So there are good things that happen. And the research supports that too. So you can see that, flexibility and actually having some problems in your path is a good thing. So this article here on early career setback and future career impact, setbacks actually lead to longer term success. So people who come right out of the starting gate with like a big grant to fund their research do not, on average, do as well as the people who come out and get it, an R01 grant in the US, who do write a good grant, but not quite good enough to get funded on the first round. They are the researchers who tend to do the best over time. Because what happens when you have a setback, you're like, okay, I got to regroup. I'm going to have to make this better. And so that's what happens in a career path as well. And so you can see some other things here. Again, I can give you all of these and share these slides with you if you're interested in any of these things. So that kind of flexibility and using your interests and passions when you have the opportunity to be flexible is a really good thing. So the other thing I've mentioned before is to not care so much about process and to care more about people. And I mentioned, I think, that a lot of the people I mentor who really want to be in leadership roles, and I have to say, I was never someone who really wanted a leadership role. The kinds of things I love doing are writing and research and being with patients. And so I never really thought, oh, I'd direct a clinic and all of those sorts of things. A lot of people who really do and are wonderful leaders know that from the beginning, but they tend sometimes to care more about process. So they come in the very beginning of their career saying, you know what, I know I could make this a better place. I know I could figure out some processes here that would make things better. So it's just something to think about. If you are one of those kinds of people who are like, I love to be a leader and I love to be in control and figure things out. We need people like that. Just be aware that it's important also to care about the person. Than just the process. And being a manager is something that I've had to learn. It's not something that comes naturally to me, actually. But I've learned that when I support others, it definitely supports me. Being part of a great team, working for people as you're on your way to becoming more of a leader, doing that in a way that is team building and finding the kinds of teams that support your development, your whole person development. And I sort of say good managers are like good parents. You don't want someone who's paternalistic or maternalistic, but you want that. A good parent is a parent who says, okay, I'm going to teach this person everything I know in the best way I possibly can do it. And I expect them to be independent and leave someday. And I found myself at one point early in my career working for somebody who did not believe that. He really felt like, and there are mentors like that, I think more in the generation before me, but who really think that, listen, you're working for me as a postdoctoral student, you will stay with me for the next 40 years. And that is, I mean, it works for some people, but that did not work for me. So, and the research sort of backs me up on some of these things that I were talking about, that managers who really value the unique strengths of a person and who empower others, really care about their well-being, tend to be the most successful kinds of managers. So then I wanted to mention cooperation as being one of those things that is important for career development. In my own career, this is a couple of examples of articles that I've written with others, really just part of a collaboration. I really am not an expert in multiple sclerosis. I'm definitely not an expert in any sort of chromosomal aberrations other than knowing what they are, but I've been able to work with some really amazing researchers and add my little piece to each one of these studies that's important. So it really does benefit your career to cooperate, even with people that you're like, and I'm always honest, like, I don't know that I have anything to add to this team. Like, yeah, sure you do. So just be open to that sort of thing. And the research really does support this, that in medical school, there are different stages and examples of ways that you can promote collaboration and be part of a collaborative team. So you can see here, junior medical students in small group contexts, as you become a senior medical student, learning in clinical teams, doing clinical placements in classrooms, and interns and junior medical officers under direct supervision. And you can see, physicians in clinical teams, lots of different workplaces. So it is an important part of being a happy employee, a happy physician, a happy professional. And as part of that, you want to make sure your career is more important than your job. And there are differences in these things. The researcher, Amy, and I don't really know how to say her name, to be honest, but her job, her career, and her calling is, she has identified these three things as being quite different. So your job is what you do for work. And you might find yourself in situations during different years of your life where it's like, I've got to have this job, I need the money, or I need this particular thing. And that's okay. Just be aware of, like, right now, I am working at my job on the way to finding my career. And career is what you do to advance towards your goals, the things that you want to do. And then your calling is that part of you that gives you a sense of purpose. So the sorts of things you want to ask yourself is, what is the most meaningful part of my day? Do I end my day feeling emotionally satisfied? Would I be in this position if I didn't need the money? And do I want to rise in my career path, or am I happy where I am? There are a lot of people who are really happy. I see wonderful physicians who are general medical practitioners, like, I never want to write a paper. I love being with patients. And perhaps they're not satisfied emotionally at the end of the day because of the paperwork, but those are things that can be changed or worked on, or not always easily, but oftentimes those are the things to think about. So one of the things I wanted you to think about, is to just draw a line. And if you don't have paper or pencil, if we were together in person, I'd make you guys get out of paper and draw a line. And imagine that line is your career. Now, I did this once in grad school, and the professor said, pretend it's your life. That's too scary for me. But to think about where you are in your career path, and I put this here, like, I'm here, I'm probably more over here to think about it, but I don't know. I feel like, truthfully, in my career, I'm more in here, but in reality, so you can sort of think about this, like, I'm at the beginning of my career. It helps just sort of put into place how much more time you have to develop that career. And one of the things you want to think about is, if money or time were no object, what would you do? So there are no restrictions whatsoever. What is it that you would do? And as part of this presentation I did in graduate, or I was part of in graduate school, I didn't do it, we had to draw this timeline and then also write down the one thing we would do if money or time were no object. This was like 30 years ago. And I wrote down, I'd write a book. And so write that, whatever that is, down. Like writing something down. I still have that piece of paper. It's like, oh, I did that. So what is the thing that you would do? It might have nothing to do with your career too. It's like, I want to travel to this place. And if that's the case, you want to look for a career that allows you to do that. And there are places that can allow you to do that. Part of that relates to what is it that you value. And I just put down some values here. These are, values are the things that what's important to me at this stage in my life. Do I like the kind of job that provides a lot of structure, or do I like a job where I have a lot of independence? Do I like a job that gives me the opportunity to be creative, or do I like a job where I know exactly what I'm doing every single day? These are not judgments. These are values. All of us like different things. When I was starting out in psychology, this issue here, security and money, was never an issue. Like if you went into psychology, you didn't do it for the money, and sort of like that in medicine too. It's okay to want to be secure. It's okay to want to make money. And then for other people, it's sort of like, it's not that important to me. But are other things important to you, like adventure or travel? These are things that values that you want to make sure that what you're doing in a day-to-day basis and also in the long term really are in line with your values. So if you value flexibility and you're in a job where you have zero flexibility, you need to find the kind of position that gives you that. And so, and again, not everybody likes that. Some people really like I like a boss, or I like a sort of situation where I know exactly what I'm being asked to do all of the time. That's awesome too. And I just kind of wrote down, so what is it right now at my point in life that I really like? I like a variety. I like flexibility. I like independence, to be creative. I also love traveling. So I've been able to, even with this job and having a dual appointment in 2 different places, be able to do that as part of my job. I'm super, super lucky. But I've, also been aware in some ways of, okay, there've been many years when I was unhappy. And so when you're unhappy, just make sure you're paying attention to that it doesn't have to always be that way. And it's usually when you're unhappy, it's because you are out of whack with your values, that you are not in line with your values. So think about those sorts of things. What is it that I value? So those are my little key ingredients for success. And I would be more than happy to stop sharing even and talk to anybody who's got questions.
Hello, Dr. Ellen. Yeah, Thanks for the wonderful lecture. I really enjoyed it. I have a couple of questions. 2 are very general and 1 is very personal. So the 2 general questions would be, as a behavioral psychologist, what are the key challenges you came across in the pediatric population or with parents itself?
Okay, so do you want me to answer that before you go to the other ones?
Yeah.
So I would say that, and I'm not sure this is what you mean about challenges, but I'll throw this out and then you can follow up if it's not exactly what you mean. But when I think of what's the most challenging part of my work in pediatrics, it's the parents. It's stressed parents who want to do the right thing and can't get out of their own way. Parents, so that I would say is the biggest challenge. And the other one is probably school systems. So, and they're wonderful, don't get me wrong, they're fabulous. I work with many fabulous parents, and even parents who are difficult to work with are wonderful people. But I think that those 2 systems, because kids live within a system, a family system and a school system, when those things aren't going well, they are the biggest impediments to child success. Is that kind of what you were thinking about when you were asking?
Yeah, definitely. Maybe my question was mostly catering towards how do you deal with challenges that parents face, including kids they face? Obviously, since you're a psychologist, uh, you would be more catered towards the pediatric population in terms of catering towards their needs. But in terms of the parents' perspective, counseling them would be another mountainous job to do as well, I believe. So how do you, like, what sort of challenges they generally have a problem with?
So I think that, the one thing that in psychology that I always think about when I see a new patient is, what is it that they've lost? Not so much for children, but for adults. So kids come to us because somebody has brought them there. And the person who's brought them there, or an adult client who's coming in, has usually come in to see me because they've lost something. And if it's a medical issue, in your case, they've been worried something didn't go the way they expected. And so you want to keep that in mind, that what is it that this person has lost? Because whatever that is what is causing them the difficulties. It's what's going to cause them anxiety. It's going to cause them to act in ways that are unusual and sometimes inappropriate. So empathy and that idea about thinking about, well, let me think about what it is they lost, and then empathizing with them is the most important thing that you can do. Even when you don't know the answer, to say, I don't know what the cure is here. I really don't know what it is that we need to do. And we're going to figure this out together. And I'm here. Like, that's the simplest thing that you can do. And it goes such a long way. Okay. Go ahead. Were you going to say something else?
Yeah, thanks for this answer. The second question was, it's a bit scientific for this one right now. So what really determines whether a child is going to be smart, or let's say he meets all the milestones in the right time versus other children? Why some people are able to achieve things quickly versus other people who achieve things more slowly? So is it just nurture, or is it just nature, or is it just genetics, or can we condition each child to the specific requirements so each one of them achieves the whatever task they're able to do in the right time, or maybe everyone is just equally smart?
No, not everyone is equally smart, unfortunately. And the answer to your question is that it's about 50-50, that it's about 50% genetics and about 50% environment. So 50% is a lot, though. So if you're born with a certain genetic footprint and you're in an environment that doesn't support that, you're not going to be the same person. If you're in same genetics that we can do to nurture someone at any place in sort of the bell-shaped curve of intelligence. That being said, we also need to value different kinds of intelligences. And we tend to, in sort of Western culture, really value certain sorts of things. And speed is one of those things. It's one reason why I became interested in sort of the speed of cognitive processing, because we really think that smart people are fast. And that's a value judgment. It's a cultural judgment used in a lot of cultures around the world, actually. So to answer that question, there are, the research that's being done on the brain in terms of quickness has to do with things like white matter generation and development, like the synaptic cleft, that some brains just have a bigger synaptic cleft. And so there's a bigger space for information to be communicated across, for neurotransmitters to be communicated across, and that some brains are just, the neurotransmitters that they are wired to have, it's not the right way of saying it, but that there are, like, people are predisposed to things like depression, anxiety, autism spectrum, and yeah.
And it might be very difficult to really catch them at a very early stage until they really face it.
Yes, but we know that things like consistency in the environment, literacy, early literacy, not too much pressure on kids, what we call in the zone of development, that they're just able to just keep moving along their developmental curve, as opposed to too much pressure or not enough pressure.
Wow, that's wonderful. The last question I would like to ask is, so for instance, it's a much more personal question. For instance, if I want to make a career change, how do I get the confidence to make that career change? See, I know what I want to do, but then obviously there is some self-doubt as well. Unless I just try and then let go of whatever I've done in the past, that's a different story.
So I think that one of the things you want to do is gather as much information as you can. So you want to, when you make a big career change, you want to make sure that you are doing this with your eyes wide open and with as much information as you possibly can. And talk to the people in the field, talk to the people who know you, and try out some of this. It oftentimes, and I don't know if it's this way with you, but when we make a big change, we sometimes keep it secretive because we're afraid that other people are going to judge us. I don't know if that's in your case at all, but it's still getting feedback from the people who know you, and not just one or two, but really getting feedback from people in different parts of your life as to whether or not what they think, and not necessarily going with what they think if they're like, no, that's a terrible idea, but integrating, asking them, well, why do you think that way? What, sometimes your fears are other people's fears. And so, for example, just in my own life, like I didn't major in psychology as an undergrad because my family would say, well, like psychologists, they can't make a career like teaching, you can get a job. So that sort of thing that is still part of our selection process.
Yeah, that's there's still a lot of figuring out to do, So yeah, but also it can also be about bad experiences, or rather than lack of passion. So the conflict arises there as well.
Yeah. And I think nobody should be staying in a bad experience that is, and if you're feeling bad about yourself because of the job that you're in, it might have to do, like sometimes we're depressed or we're anxious and it interferes with our job, but it's also the case where we're in a position where our job itself, the people around us are abusive, or, we've got a attending physician and we're spending days with them and they are not good mentors. So make sure that you're not blaming yourself for what you're experiencing in the people around you. And I hope you all have wonderful people around you.
Yeah.
But we all run into people who also have their own issues. Like sometimes wonderful people have really, they suffer from their own depression, or they've had a crisis in their own life and they're not at their best. So don't personalize or internalize other people's stuff is what I would really recommend.
Thanks a lot. All of them are wonderful answers.
Oh, I'm going to look at this. Okay. Oh, as a person who's had experience both medical and educational contexts, the standard of care is really similar. I'm still not completely sure about the career prospects. I've worked with a few people here. I don't know. Michael gets it. It's a psychiatrist. He used to be at, oops, sorry. I just almost X'd out of this. So it's hard for me to even now get a good grasp of the career path here in Central Europe compared to the US. And it's, I think, in some ways easier, in some ways harder. The easier part here is that it's a smaller community. So once you can find someone who's a mentor who is successful, you are already connected then with other successful people. So that's a real plus. The downside is you have a small pool of people who can mentor you. And if you're in a position where you're not with a great group of people, it can make it harder. And so but the clinical care itself, I felt like there were things that I could teach here, but my colleagues knew, we all had things we could teach each other, but we were all pretty much the same in terms of the field of psychology and psychiatry. And the other big difference is the national healthcare here, and that a lot of time is spent as a clinician in the US working with insurance companies. Not the same in Canada, but in the US, it's really bad. That was the biggest difference. And not only that, and this is an aside, but if you run a clinic, like I managed a clinic, like I managed like 3 people who did all the insurance stuff. So it was that sort of thing that I wasn't prepared for, because here you don't have like a whole team of people managing the calls to insurance companies and the paperwork and all of that. So it's a little bit different management there versus here. Any other questions?
So are you teaching at LF2 still? Like, do you teach classes that we could potentially be part of?
Well, so here's the thing. I used to, and I still come to the Czech Republic. I mean, it's been different because of COVID. So I'm here now, actually. And I used to guest lecture a lot for the international medical students at Motel Hospital. Are you guys from all over, all different hospitals, or are you? Okay. So I'm happy to do that. So if you have a medical director at your hospital, I'm happy to come and lecture on the things that I know about. But I used to do that regularly. I used to do like almost a whole week's worth of lectures for, not almost, a week's worth of lectures for the international students on, sort of intensive on child development and child psychopathology. And I really loved it. But none of the classes were happening in person. And so I haven't done that since, maybe I did it once during some time in COVID, but whenever I was here and the cases were down, but it's been over a year for sure.
Ironically enough, actually, if it wasn't for the articles that LF2 wrote about it, we wouldn't actually be here today. So if it wasn't for that opportunity that you had, we would not be having this lecture. So it's actually kind of good in a way.
Yeah.
Mm. Okay.
So yeah, but I'd be happy to do that. And I do, it's just hard right now because I was supposed to be part of a conference that didn't happen. And it's just, I'm hoping that I will do more as, when I'm here in the future. So.
Well, if that is all for questions, anyone else, you will have the floor. Okay.
I would like to ask something. How do you handle the exposure to such like psychological diseases? Has it ever been an issue for you, or do you have to be a certain type of person, or is it more the approach that you take?
For me, it's easier because I work with kids. So I always, when I was talking about that optimism, it also informs my clinical practice, but it also is part of, like, working with kids is a fairly optimistic area for me. Now, I have friends who love geriatrics. They just love it. And I'm like, how can you do that? Because people are at their end of their life and they're like, but it's so interesting. And it's such an interesting part of life. And it's, underexplored. And so for me, it's not that part. The psychological part of the child psychopathology is not that difficult because we have good treatments. We have a lot of, availability to make a difference in someone's life. And the longer I've worked in the field, the more optimistic I am about it because I've seen kids grow and become really healthy, well-functioning adults. Not everyone does, but for the most part, the vast majority of them do. So in some ways, it's easier for me than if I had to work, like I said, with geriatric population, or even a psychologist who works in an oncology ward, for example. That would be really tough for me. So we all kind of find those areas where our interests are I guess are the possibility of us being depressed about or overwhelmed with the emotional aspects of our job are overshadowed by our interests and our enthusiasm for learning about whatever it is that our patients have.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No. Okay, right. Thank you very much, Dr. Braaten, for your time. This was a wonderful lecture. It's been very, very insightful. And to everyone else, I hope you have a wonderful evening. And yeah, good luck for exams.
Yes, good luck. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much thank you so much, everyone.